Hey friends, here it is, my conversation with Bart Campolo. He's been a friend for a long time. Many of you know him. I talk to him regularly here on the podcast. He is a humanist, and we get right back into it. And it's become clear to me that we want the best for each other, and I kind of want him to be on the progressive side of religious life, and he wants me to be on the progressive side of humanism. And it comes up at the end of our conversation, but I think we're kind of recruiting each other into one another's camp because we say there's people over here who really need you. So we're both engaging in the human flourishing endeavors of life. And here's our conversation. Hey, friends, talking with Bart Campolo here, as I like to refer to him, humanist extraordinaire. Because that you are, my friend. Bart, a couple of things I like to talk about with you, sort of your life and just the interesting things of, the life and times of Bart Campolo, but also this humanist Christian conversation and what it means for a lot of us to think about ourselves and as, beings, humans, entities trying to live in the world. So thanks for being willing to do this.
Yeah. You know where I was last week?
Where's that?
I was in Seattle at the East Lake Church.
You were. How was your time there?
I had a great time, but that's a church I know you've been to.
I've been there a lot. I'm a big fan of those good friends out there.
Yeah.
How did it feel being back, standing in front of a bunch of Christians and saying things out loud?
Well, that church, that church is sort of drifting in my direction.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so I felt quite at home there.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's interesting. Talk a little bit about that for those who haven't always kept up on all the life and times of Bart Campolo and what you're doing. Describe that direction or that shift that you've gone through, and I don't know, put a timeline on it or something for people who don't yet know.
Yeah, in the simplest analysis, I grew up. My dad's a big hotshot evangelist. The Christian thing didn't make sense to me myself until I was in high school. Got swept up in a youth group in high school. Totally went, big time evangelical Christian guy, but always struggled with the narrative. Love the community, love the sense of mission, love the fellowship. Always struggled with the, Jesus rising from the dead and flying into heaven stuff.
Yeah.
And, eternal utopias and all that kind of, and in the evangelical world that I was in, it was all very, very real. These weren't metaphors. This was real stuff. This was real stuff. And increasingly the real stuff didn't make sense to me. So I sort of migrated about 7 years ago, sort of after my faith had sort of died the death of 1,000 cuts. And about 7 years ago, I had a bike accident, which is ironic because I had a bike accident today.
Yeah.
And
maybe this can be conversion number 2 after your bike accident.
Yeah, maybe I'll come back. Yes. But, when I recovered from this head injury, I was very aware that my identity was in my brain and that when I died, I'd be dead. And that this life was the only one that I had. And at that point, I remember saying to my wife, I'm pretty sure this is all we get. And she said, yeah, I think the same way. She's like, you got to stop being a professional Christian because you don't believe any of it. It's all over for you.
Yeah.
And so for the last 7 years, I've been trying to figure out what it means to be a minister of love and goodness on the other side of faith. Because, for me, it was my values that drew me into Christianity.
Yeah.
I loved community. I loved loving people. I loved making a difference in the world. That's what drew me to Christianity. It seemed like a club for people that had those values.
Yeah.
But in the end, the narrative itself, it's unbelievable to me at this stage in the game. It's not like I won't believe it. I can't. It does,
It actually interferes for you, like the experience of those beliefs, that idea, those understandings get in the way of the kind of life you'd like to lead. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
or you're just beyond it. You're just done with it.
They're just distracting. Like if I went like if somebody died and somebody comes to me and says, well, they're in a better place. Like, I don't think that's true. And I find that idea sort of distracting and like unhelpful.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, could you be quiet? Like, this is really weird. And I don't want to hear that anymore.
Yeah.
And so like it ultimately, if you want to make the most of this life, in some ways, certain Christian doctrines are really, downright obstacles. Like that whole thing about original sin, like it's like the idea of like you're actually worthy of damnation, and you just like that's actually not a helpful idea.
As you know, because I've tried to suggest, and more people with better ways of suggesting this have said it to you. Those aren't always the demands that Christianity or even belief in God put on someone.
No. I mean, and I did a lot of the workarounds, but in the end, what I ended up realizing was that the effort I was putting into making the Bible portray the kind of God that you believe in, that was just more effort than it was worth. I'm like, you can do it. As I once said,
but why would you?
Yeah, I once said to my friend Brian McLaren, I like, you guys all look to me like people that are taking a submarine and trying to retrofit it into an airplane. And I'm like, I have no doubt that you're smart enough and with enough effort you can do it. But wouldn't it be easier just to start from scratch?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I have thought it's very helpful for me to hear you say that, because I've thought those things myself so many times, and many people I know think those and say those to me on a regular basis, and I believe them. And sometimes I think they're right. The metaphor I have taken was actually, I think what's happened over time is people have graffitied a narrative that we can find in this sort of ancient telling, and have vandalized it. And so I'm not trying to get it to do something it wasn't designed to do. I'm trying to demark it from the ways that people have tagged it with certain sets of graffiti and different meanings. So it's interesting that different projects that we all sense that we're about. The thing that I like talking with you about so much is there's this shared sense that, hey, it's not working, right? And I don't just mean religion and specifics of Christianity, but sort of the project of how humanity is engaging with itself inside of its religion and non-religious enterprises. That's just not working for a lot of people. That's a really...
Yeah, somebody sent me an article just today about how this generation of young people are, by all measures, the loneliest group of young people we've ever had. They feel isolated, they feel alienated, they feel misunderstood, and you can do the social media analysis and you can do all of that, but like on some level, it's not working real well. Yeah,
there's a deeper, and the planet, and strife for a lot of people, and the way that we engage with each other. We need additional ways. So one of the things that was
can I just tell you one quick thing?
Please.
So anyway, when I said, like, when you were asking about my experience, so this friend of ours, Ryan Meeks, was a pastor of an evangelical megachurch, and in Seattle, like 5,000 people and all this stuff. He grew up the son of a kind of a big time Christian leader, sort of like I did.
Yeah.
And about 5 years ago, he got up and said, like, you know what, our church is not going to do this evangelical thing where we're not for gay people. We're totally gay affirming now. Like, and he lost half his congregation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that experience sort of has set him on a path where he's sort of going like, wait a second, how much of this stuff do I really buy?
Yeah.
And not just him, his whole staff. And so they lost a lot of members, but they kept their staff together, and they're all sort of migrating. And so when I was out there, they invited me, like a humanist, to speak in their church.
Right.
And lots of people on the staff were like, oh, finally, like, you're where I'm at. Like, I haven't believed in God for 3 years, or whatever. And so their whole church is sort of trying to figure out, what does it mean to pursue goodness on the other side of that whole narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's like the songs that they're singing, and yet it all still feels like they have a band and that they do the lighting. It feels like you're just at a regular old megachurch.
Yeah, it feels a familiar Sunday morning at 10:30 to a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet, and the emotions were there and the warmth was there. But the narrative that they're preaching is that love is just a better way of life.
Yeah.
And we're going to pursue it.
Yeah. One of the sermons I did there actually was this one about, it's sort of my new shtick, so I'll run it by on you. It's that I'm trying to, in my progressiveness, both socially and culturally and sort of interpersonally, I find myself kind of catching up to the narrative of where Jesus is and what I think the Christian call is. So I experienced what I think a lot of people do, that if you sort of have a continuum where maybe on the left you have conservatism and on the right you have freedom and liberty and progressivism. And I tended, and a lot of people tend to think that Jesus and the teachings of Jesus and life and Christianity are over on the left and they're conservative. So the more you move on that continuum toward progressivism, you find yourself getting further away from all those stories and they don't make sense until at some point they're kind of a distant memory and sort of they're a long way away and you can see them off in the distance. And then they kind of drift from sight altogether. And what I've found is that this story, as I've revisited it, is actually, it's almost like that story has arced over the top and now is in front of me. And now I'm trying to catch up to this kind of progressive narrative of Jesus and of the Gospels and of what they tell. Because now that my own thinking has changed on this, I'm like, oh, I have been putting words into Jesus's mouth about things that he suggests that I think are way more progressive than I am. And I'm trying to catch up to that stuff. And I think that's part of the path that a lot of us follow. Now, I don't think that everybody has to have a Jesus narrative in their life. I just happen to have one. But I think it's a much more aggressively progressive view than I ever thought that it was.
My experience is that when people, what they find in Jesus, what they find in Jesus tells me a lot more about who they are than it does about who Jesus
for sure.
is.
Yeah.
Like nobody really, people always said to me, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? And I'm thinking I have no access to Jesus. I have 4 accounts of Jesus that were written many years after he died, and have been chopped and cut and pasted like crazy. I'm like, I have no I have no direct access to this person. I know more about Winston Churchill than I know about Jesus.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, so like the idea of, but what it is it's a wonderful collection of stories and aphorisms upon which you can project almost any worldview. Because I've watched people project onto Jesus lots of different things.
Yeah.
And so when somebody tells me about how progressive and loving and kind Jesus is, I sort of go like, oh, I like you. It's not, but again, it tells me kind of where they're, and when Jerry Falwell Jr. shows up and says, no, let me tell you about who Jesus is. He wants everyone to be armed.
Yeah. He's rough and mean.
I go like, oh, well, that doesn't tell me anything about Jesus, but it tells me a lot about you, Jerry.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's part of the project. And, it's funny because that's not just true about our relationship with any of our faith or the content of our faith, right? It's actually something really true about our relationships with each other. And
we see the world not as it is, but as we are.
As we are, yeah. I think that's definitely true. And so I am quite enthralled by the narrative and even the biblical narratives. It's been very funny for me to return to them. I just finished a book called Greater Than. And the subtitle is How Ordinary People Are Outdoing Jesus and Why It's Good News. So it's a book that suggests that Jesus' call all along, and if you're going to be part of that story, you're invited into this one, is to do the works Jesus has done and do even greater things than these, as Jesus would say it. So it's a call to sort of extend and continue an entire story and narrative. It's so for me, it's like that's just super fun to take it that way, and for others, I know that what they need to be freed from and is that there's consequence or punishment for not doing it the old way. And I think the work that you do and that so many other people do, especially, Eastlake and others, they're reminding us that we hold ourselves inside our own little prisons. so often, and kind of hurt one another and hurt ourselves by binding ourselves up inside these places.
Yeah, I mean, boy, I mean, I get, and it's interesting. Well, you know what? Go on with what you were, because what I was going to say is I get these letters every day.
Yeah.
From people who are haunted by a God they no longer believe in.
Mm-hmm.
And they're worried about, and they feel like they're letting people down. And, there's, and what you realize is, and the reason I say go on with what you're going to do, because like you sent me this article.
Yeah. Because I think it dovetails into this in a lot of ways.
Exactly. Because what happens is that there are these people that they no longer believe in God, but they're still haunted by, or they still sometimes do. Sometimes they wake up in the middle of the night and go like, oh no, what if I go to hell? And then there are these people that believe in God wholeheartedly, and sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh my gosh, what if none of it's true? What if this is all there is?
Yeah. And most of us have been told over and over that kind of inconsistency shows that that's a problem to be solved. I don't think it is a problem to be solved. I think it's a condition of being a person. So this article that I sent you, it's one of those clickbait ones, but it's actually pretty good. This woman, Tara Isabella Burton, does some writing, and she writes about religion in the world. And so the article is entitled This poll asked Americans if they believe in God. Their answers were fascinating, is what she says. And the subtitle is 20% of Christians don't believe in the God of the Bible. And 17% of religious nuns, non-affiliateds, of religious non-adherents do believe in God. So she goes into the statistics of this Pew Research article and basically pulls out that, hey, our old rules that we said that religious people believed in God and non-religious people are nothing but material humanists, just doesn't bear out in the current statistics and studies. Even suggesting that 17, I think it is, I should get this one right, that 17% of self-described atheists, 18% believe in some form of higher spiritual power that they organize their life around. So it's kind of intriguing to me that 20% of self-identified Christians don't believe in the God of the Bible, and 18% of self-described atheists say, well, yeah, I do believe in some kind of a higher power, it's a funny world that we live in where once the demand and punishment is lifted, it seems like people are willing to say, hey, I believe in this, don't believe in that, but I'm not sure what category that puts me in anymore.
Yeah, I mean, does it bear out with your experience?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I think most religious people I know would say that their belief in God is somewhere between shaky and non-existent. And I don't mean their faith. I don't mean like how they say, do I act as a faithful person and do what I think God wants me to do? That's a real low percentage of people that ever answer affirmatively to that. But of people who would say, oh, if you are asking me if my view of the cosmos has a God narrative in it that matches anything that somebody would sort of determine to be kind of godlike, I'm a little shaky on that. Most Christians, most pastors I've known are super shaky on that. In fact, most people that I know that are in professional religious work from the Christian side, they are in religious work because they're trying to come to some reconciliation on their thoughts about God. So I have long believed and found people to be really iffy on their structure. So that's why we teach so hard on it in some places. That's why the doctrines are so rigid, because they know that people aren't going to conclude there's a God as described by my religious tradition on their own. You're going to get taught into that. That is not. Now, you may have a sense of spirituality and or connectedness or even the divine, but this idea that you're going to fall into a God narrative, I think we have to teach people into that, kind of like teaching someone geometry. Like they might be able to recognize geometric realities in the world, but they have to be taught it.
I hate to disagree.
No, please.
But my experience is that her article is interesting and true. On the other hand, is that I sometimes, when I read the writings of like Hitchens and Dawkins, and they're like, God is not great, and religion poisons everything, and
Yeah.
it's almost as if they want to just go around and disabuse everybody of all their supernaturalism. And I'm always like, if those guys succeeded, and one day nobody believed in any supernatural force in the universe, I'm like, the next day people would invent God again. The next day people would, in every culture, everywhere in the world, independently, people came up with some narrative of supernatural meaning. Like every hunter-gatherer tribe does it. Like it's the most natural thing in the world to believe in forces.
Yeah, yeah, that's helpful. I was not suggesting people aren't going to hold to something supernatural, interconnected, and try to name it. I'm saying the confines of religious traditions know that any of their explanations of God fall short, and adherents drift away. And most people.
But what I was going to say is, like, you could wipe out the whole God concept, and people would reinvent it in some form. Mm-hmm. If you wiped Christianity off the map, no one would ever think of that again.
That's a good point.
That's
funny.
Like no one would ever reinvent that, or Islam, or any. That's the funny thing. Like now, of course, if you wipe evolution off the map, if you eliminated all traces of the theory of evolution,
mm-hmm.
given enough time, people would figure that out again. The evidence is there. Like if you wiped out Newtonian physics or Einsteinian physics, given enough time, like science, it's like
that's interesting.
You just figure that out all over again. Like you could blow up all those books and people would just rewrite them.
Mm-hmm.
But you blow up the Bible, no one would ever come up with that thing again.
Right. It's so bound to a particular development of human narratives that if you don't start with those, if you don't move from humanity's experience of the last 15,000 years of organizing, you're probably not going to end up with a distant God via monotheism. Yeah, no, I think that's probably right.
Or penal substitutionary atonement, or those miracles, or Jesus treating women that way and men this other way. Like you're just not going to see that.
Yeah.
Like because that's a very specific.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tribal text. And so that's the interesting thing. Is like when they say that those atheists, unless the post-Christian atheists, are sometimes still worried about the God of the Old Testament. But even a cradle atheist once in a while has that experience of sort of going like, I don't know, that seems like more than a coincidence, or gee, this seems intrinsically meaningful, or I want, and those experiences, and I always say, like, I just fell off my bike earlier today.
Mm-hmm.
And my first response is to go like, why?
Right. What did I do?
Yeah. And so you call out and you think like, well, when you were a little baby,
mm-hmm.
what's your first experience in this world? Is a baby like is hungry. It's lying there. It cries out. And what happens?
Well, you hope someone comes. Yeah.
Somebody comes.
Or they turn into a dastardly villain later in life. Right.
Right. But like somebody comes.
Mm-hmm.
And you sort of like, so like the earliest lesson you learn is that kind of like cry out. Somebody might hear you. Somebody
mm-hmm.
might hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's out there. Like somebody cares. And so I think like we are hardwired. The other thing is, I don't know if you ever heard the evolutionary argument for faith.
I don't know that I've heard it put that way. I've heard the developmental theory of human developmental theory. Is that what you're?
No. This is one where it says like, look, you're walking through the savannah and there's rustling in a bush, and you could either be like, and like, you don't know. It could be the wind, or it could be like a saber-toothed tiger.
Yeah.
And so like, if you go, there's rustling there, I don't know what it is, I'm going to say it's a saber-toothed tiger, and you run, your DNA goes on. But like, if you go like, I'm going to wait for evidence, well, you might make it, but like, if it's a tiger, you die. And so what happens is that it's sort of like natural selection favors those that find meaning where it is, and also find meaning where it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so we become storytelling animals that sort of make meaning
mm-hmm.
out of things. And so, you know, there's a sense in which I think it's very natural for us to kind of see meaning in everything,
Mm-hmm.
and to tell stories about everything.
Yeah, and that's what I think is happening all along. Like I think that that Christianity is as derivative from some kind of Jewish early Jewish expression, which was a derivative of some kind of an Israelite expression, which was a derivative of some kind of a Mesopotamian expression. Like there, all the way through the Bible and through history, you have this development of these corrections, right? You can see if you read the Old Testament the way I do, it's meant to tell a story of the development of moving from an isolated God of demand for perfection to a Yahweh God of no sacrifice being demanded, to Jesus' teaching of a God that's isn't bound up in tribalism, and then the expression sort of continues through time and through faith. So it's always developmental, right? It's always humanity figuring out ways to tell the story. The same thing in Islam, the same thing in Hinduism. These are all every iteration, every generation re-narrates the story in a way that opens it and is wrestling with its past. Other people view it as, no, it's kind of a static thing that's always been, and we're either on or off with that thing. We're either for it or not for it, or it's true or it's not true, as opposed to there's nothing humanity has that's not an unfolding story that's opening up over time. And that's what I think is happening currently as people are now talking about their religious experience, where they're saying, oh, my certain set of beliefs don't necessarily correspond to the demand that the religious community is putting on it. So if I don't believe in God, I don't get kicked out. If I do believe in God, I don't have to be religious. I think that's a fascinating way of seeing the world develop, as opposed to, hey, you know, there's people who are like this and people who are like that, and you should just transfer from one tribe to the other. And I'm not suggesting you're saying that. I'm saying that a lot of the system puts those demands on people, but the populace is kind of saying like, no, I don't see it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Somebody sent me a thing the other day for a podcast that they wanted me to check out, and I checked it out, and it didn't move me as much as it moved them, but the title was amazing. The title is called "The One You Feed."
Huh.
Have you heard of this?
No. Nice.
And it's based on the old story of like, there's a dark wolf, mm-hmm. and there's an evil wolf and a good wolf, and they're both trying to get you.
Nice.
And the question is, which one wins in the battle between the dark wolf and the good wolf? And the answer is the one you feed. Or my dad used to tell a story of like a farmer said, like, I sometimes feel like my soul has a team of horses at one side and they're hitched up to me trying to pull me in the wrong direction. And a team of horses on the other side trying to pull me towards Jesus. And my dad says, and which team wins? And he goes like, whichever one I says giddy up to. Yeah. But like the idea is that we each have these elements in our lives. And I think what defines us is the one you feed. So like for me, I'm feeding this narrative that says this life is the only one that you have, and the way to make the most of it is by loving people. And I have a confirmation bias, so I notice articles that confirm that, and I like songs that celebrate it, and I am more comfortable with people that talk about it. And then, and you say, well, what about that other part of you that occasionally cries out, why? Yeah. Like, why isn't the universe being fair to me? Where are you, Lord? And you go like, oh yeah, I'm starving that guy. Yeah. That guy causes me a lot of trouble. He's caused a lot of my friends a lot of trouble. The world doesn't need me to believe in that guy. So, and sometimes I'm with my Christian friends and you go like, why is their faith growing? You're like, oh, because that's the wolf they feed. Yeah. Yeah. Does that make sense? And so each of us has the capacity. And a lot of it is like, well, what's your social setting? Like my dad talks about plausibility structure. He's like, if as a Christian, you surround yourself with other Christians who are like, Jesus is Lord. And, this is real. Like it becomes a plausible idea to you. It's easier to hold that idea there than it is if you're at the gathering of the American Association of Atheists and, and secular humanists, like if there was such a thing.
Yeah.
There are these organizations, and if you're in that setting, you're just going to be constantly inundated with evidence that suggests that every form of supernaturalism is just a human invention.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like the one you feed.
Okay. Can I ask you about this again? Because we've circled back on this a couple of times, but I'm really interested in your thoughts on this. It seems as if you're suggesting that if there's human evidence inside of the belief system, therefore it is a human construct and not this other thing that should be trusted in the way that religion wants to defer its trust. That if the human hand is on it, if you catch the DNA or the fingerprints of humanity in the creation of a belief, then okay, the jig is up. It's not
because there's human hands are on every.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So it feels like no,
but you know how the scientific method works. Somebody invents an idea.
Yeah.
They just imagine it. They go like, "What if this?"
Yeah.
And then the difference is that then they have to go test it, and then after they've tested it and found like evidence or data that supports it, then they write it up, and somebody else looks at it and goes like, and I'm going to prove you wrong.
Yeah.
And like it takes if everybody keeps getting the same data, that's when that idea becomes part of the narrative. But they all have human hands on them.
Right. Right.
And scientists disagree with each other based on ideological differences. So they'll see the same, Charles Murray's out there right now.
Yeah.
He puts out, there's data and different people interpret it different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it's ideological and it's political and it's personal. But there's at least there's a sense in which there's a process by which.
Got it. But what you seem to say.
You move past the human hands.
But what you seem to say is, well, when that comes to Christianity and you guys are saying, no, here's now my new argument about God and the Christian story or whatever, you don't get to do that. You're just making it do something. So if you'd say someone like Brian or me or others are making a new argument about the data, you say, wow, you can't do that. The data's been set for years. That's all settled. That world doesn't allow transformation. So talk me through that.
No, here's what I'm saying. Here's what I'm really saying is I don't care. Like if it works for you, if that story works for you and it makes you more loving and kind and good, go with that story. And you go like, but Bart, you don't think that story's true. And you go like, that's right. But it's true for you. Like, I
don't know that that's all you're saying, though. I don't know that you're not saying that.
Oh, listen, do you ever see me going out there trying to disabuse Christians of their faith?
No, I don't. No, I don't know. I don't know.
Why would I?
What you were doing on that bike before you had that accident? But
no,
I don't think so.
Why would I ever want to mess with somebody?
Yeah, no, I don't think you're an anti-evangelist or I don't think you're picking up the family business on the other side, like trying to unravel people. But I think you do suggest something, which I don't think is a bad thing. I'm just trying to get to it. Something a little different than convincing people they're wrong, which is to do something different than simply saying, oh, hey, lots of things work for lots of people. It seems like there's...
Well, okay. If you want the little subversive thing, I go, lots of things work for lots of people.
Yeah.
If you're really smart, probably this secular humanism thing is going to work better for you. Because ultimately the evidence is going to undermine all those other narratives. And so typically when you go to Nobel Prize winners, they're secular. And so we've got to find a way to come up with a religion where secular people inspire each other to goodness the way everybody else inspires each other to goodness, but with a narrative that kind of fits in with that worldview. But like, I'm not saying the other ones are unhelpful. I'm just saying like different narratives are more helpful to different people. Like, listen, if there's another Great Depression, everybody gets poor again, you're going to see really basic spiritual narratives reemerge. Like wherever there is poverty, wherever there is oppression, wherever there is honestly a lack of education, certain narratives, certain forms of Christianity are stronger where there's less education, and other forms of Christianity are stronger where there's more education. You go like, what are you saying? What I'm saying is like, there are different ways of like, these narratives have specific appeals to specific people in specific situations.
Well, yeah, and that's well said. And I would add to it, I think that's because of the wolf we feed. Right. So I don't think it's because people who are in strife need to revert to a graffitied God. I think a more sophisticated version of faith, spirituality, God, humanity, the earth, the interconnectedness of all things is available to people, even in times of trial and struggle and difficulty.
I remember when you guys were all in that emergent Christianity thing, like you had so many ex-gang members and ex-drug addicts in that movement. Oh, wait, you didn't. You had like really smart people.
Well, no, we had who slightly affluent people, perhaps, but not necessarily
who
smart.
hadn't had a lot of personal strife, you know. And so, But
wait.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
Let me finish that thought. Okay, but then you get down to like Victory Outreach, and all these people that were ex-bikers, ex-gang members, people that were drug addicts and stuff like that, they're almost always, when they're drawn into Christianity, they're drawn into the more experiential, the more kind of lose yourself in the moment, charismatic forms of Christianity. And you go like, that's not because of the wolf they feed. That's because like these people have a personality that is more open to being taken over. And whether they're taken over by drugs or taken over by the Holy Spirit, they like to be taken over. A control freak like me was never going to be a cocaine addict and was never going to be a charismatic Christian either.
Yeah, right. Because you're saying I agree that there's temperaments that go with certain religious expressions. I don't know, though, that the answer that the rationale for why in the last 50, 100 years certain expressions have grown is simply because of a struggle, the struggle of humanity that needs to return to some sort of base tribalism.
Hey, do you ever watch? I'm sorry, I'm a terrible interrupter.
No, that's okay. I don't mind an interruption at all. Go, feel free.
Do you ever watch those apocalyptic TV series like,
Walking Dead and all that stuff?
Or The Walking Dead? Have you ever noticed what kind of spiritual expressions they're always portraying will emerge at the when in that stuff? And it tends to be these very rigid, legalistic things that say you must obey or God will punish us again. Mm-hmm. That's because that kind of religion always emerges in the aftermath of great tragedies or great like natural disasters.
I don't know though. See, like I would say that's a classic example of the wolf you feed, that there's people who write those shows. That's the assumption they have, and they're continuing to perpetuate those assumptions. Let me run this as a thought experiment with you. There are whole portions of the human society that don't hold to a distant, removed God inside the narrative of the monotheistic separation, right? So you think about Hinduism and others. So all over Hindu culture, they've never developed, in all the struggle, all the poverty, all the pain, the kinds of things that you see developing in other religious cultures. Now, they do have inside of them varying sects that are more expressive, more legalistic, right. But they don't go to the narratives of separate single God lives on a throne and someday is going to send his son and punish him.
So, you're right. No, you're totally right.
This idea that what you're going to get in human struggle is necessarily this particular variant that I think is even doesn't even root itself from the early Christian traditions. It's a creation of a particular Western worldview for domination and so on. But I don't think the data or the human experience, or what we've noticed, supports that idea that's what you're going to get. I think that some of us see that in our culture. Yeah.
No, they won't all come up with a doomsday, end of the world, God is coming. What happens is that it's always a mixture of whatever your starter kit was.
Yeah.
And then the kind of human tendency to be like, there must be a reason this is happening. We've angered the gods. So like if you're Hindu and there's a terrible tragedy, I guarantee you there's some form of that, some concoction that they come up with that promises that if you do what we tell you to do, this will never happen again, in a Hinduistic way.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I can, there is that in the science, in what I would, my little sign over there says science is real, right? So I'm not an anti-science guy at all. The science world makes these same kind of doomsday proclamations, and here's what the solution is, and here's how you pay penance. Like that, they do follow our scientific endeavors. If what one's trying to say is that you're going to move to science as the new avenue for the human expression, it's shocking how often that follows a very similar pattern of, you broke it, here's how you fix it, this is what we're going to do, here's the orthodoxy we're now going to keep to make this happen, here's the people that are going to be in power and the people that aren't. It starts to frame out that way. But
that's, I mean, in some ways, like that's sort of like saying, like, and people breathe in every religion. Like,
that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah,
right. Human beings. Yeah. But like the other thing is like this is how life works. Actions have consequences, and if you want to change, like that's just how it is. The difference is that when the action is an earthquake, and you go like, okay, let's try to figure out seismically how that works. That's one way of like doing it, and the other is to go like, we just all need to pray more. And so the God, because there's a God that's shaking the earth, and we need to appease that God. Like, let's throw some people into a volcano. Like, I mean, you're right. Like, there's a certain similarity. There's a problem of an earthquake,
but it does sound like. See, this is where it sounds to me like if somebody were to say, "Oh, science, that's hilarious." You know what we should do? We should listen to those people who were saying, "Oh, the earth is the center of the universe," because that's what scientists used to say, and everything's going to revolve around the earth. I mean, if we're going to listen to science, we might as well go back and listen to people who say stuff like that. Nobody says that about science, because science is allowed and is demanded
changes its mind
to change its mind. And we say, "Oh, good for you changing your mind." Now, some people will argue with if the change was appropriate or not in science. That's what they should do. Then some people come to religion, and this is what I want to suggest that I might hear from you more often than you might think is, yeah, but religion doesn't get to do that. When you do that, you're just being this fringy group that's not really maintaining the orthodoxy. Come on, you've really left it anyway, because religion doesn't get to develop over time its new way of describing the reality of the world. It is bound to a set of ideas at some point and will never be freed from it, so you might as well give it up. And that sounds no different than someone who would say, give up on your sense of astronomy because at one point science had it wrong. So how do you respond to that? Have I missed you?
I go like, you are dead right. You are dead right. And that's an inconsistency in my approach to the world. That's exactly right. Is that I don't tend to just go like, listen, religion. And I mean, I consider myself religious because I'm pursuing life's ultimate questions too. But yeah. Like, listen, supernatural religion. Like, the guts of supernatural religion is a desire to figure out how the world works and how we can live a good life. And you get to change your mind too. And you get to dial back certain things. Like, you're right. Like, I sort of go like, look, if your source code is rooted back there, like, you should just like go to a narrative with a better source code. And you're like, why? Everybody else gets to change. Like, why can't we go from like your source code of science was like the Earth is the center of the universe. Like that was the observable universe. Like that was evidence. There was evidence to suggest that. And like you move from that source because you just change your mind to the point where you're saying exactly the opposite. Mm-hmm. And you go like, why can't we be like science? Why can't we just change our minds according to the evidence? And I go like, you know what? You're dead right. I take it all back.
No, that's hilarious. But what I don't want to do is suggest that the project people are in, because part of that letting go or the shift or the change for anyone is the power that a person has to say, I'm saying no to it no matter what, which I think is the ultimate human respect. And my view of God and spirituality and everything has to demand that there's agency in every human being to be able to say, nope, I'm out, and there shouldn't be punishment for me being out. That's the one gift that we should always offer to one another. And I think that most people, and why I want your voice to be out there more often than it ever is for most people who don't know the path you're on, is most people feel like, no, the cost for saying I'm out is so high, I never get to actually be honest. And they would say, I don't know anybody who talks the way your religion, Doug, your idea that religion is changing its mind. No, it's not. Right. So I'll argue against myself for a minute, and you can make this one is, okay, that you would be like saying 98% of all scientists still think the earth is flat. And you're trying to say, yeah, but not all of us, there's a little fringe over here. And that's, so the idea that religion is actually going through this transformation is where I think someone should and rightly call bullshit on my argument.
Yeah,
because it's kind of not. Now, I want it to, I want it to change, but on the whole, it's not.
Well, the thing is, like, to bring you back to that submarine analogy that I gave to Brian, I was like, why are you trying to retrofit the submarine? It's not made for this purpose. Yeah. Like the reason they invented that religion, yeah. Right. Had more to do with controlling women's sexuality and ensuring property rights. Mm-hmm. It's rooted in a kind of a place in civilization and something is a project. And they're like, why are you trying to retrofit that? And he looked right back at me with just a little mischievous grin. And he said, because there are 3 billion people on the submarine, and I'm not willing to let them go.
Yeah.
And so the retrofitting, which to me seems like, do you not see, we have global warming, we have a lot of problems. We don't have time to be retrofitting any submarines. Let's come up with a way of gathering people and inspiring each other to pursue goodness and teaching our kids moral values that isn't wrapped up in a bunch of Iron Age myths. Mm-hmm. And he goes, listen, that's a nice project you got there. There's a lot of people here that really believe, and they're not. And right now they believe that God requires them to be a certain way. And I'm here to sort of I want to portray them a God that enables them to embrace gay people, or to treat women as equals, or to fight global warming, or to, and he's like, that's a good project. That's a good project too. And I go, when I was at this Science Mike thing, I went to see Science Mike do a live thing, and there were 500 people there. And he was weaving that strange mixture of sort of vague spirituality connected to Christianity, but lots of science and lots of love and lots of morality. And there were all these people. And I was like, oh, those are submariners.
Huh. Interesting.
And you know what? God bless him for doing that. And so I am truly spiritually a utilitarian. I'm interested in what's going to help those people the most. And the truth of the matter is that secular humanism, even as benign a version as I'm selling, for a lot of those people, it's not an option.
Yeah.
But Brian McLaren's Christianity, your Christianity, Mike McCart's Christianity, that is an option. And I go it's a better option.
It's funny because we did our first conversation about this back in the fall. I think I'd sent out an email, a big broadcast email that you were kind enough to reply to, where I had said, look, we have to do something to change the religious narrative in the United States. It has so much power and all this. And you wrote this very clear, and I appreciated so much, little snarky response, which said, hey, why don't you just get off that bandwagon and get over here, right? Like, and I really liked it because I like being recruited. In the religious world I'm in, it's sort of when you're in the land of misfit toys, nobody really wants you anyway. So anybody who'd be saying like, "Hey, come over to this side and help us over here," and I find myself strangely also saying to you like, "Hey, Bart, come over to this side where we say to people that old story that religion is stagnant. No, it's not." And you're saying, hey, that old story that we need religion to get along, no, we don't. And it's such a curious, and I think there's a lot of people who have partners, friends in their life who are kind of pulling each other in those two directions, right? Like in ways that are not, I want to change you and make you into me, but in those ways that are like, I think you have so much to offer if you were to be doing it over here in this space. So that's just kind of dawning on me now that like.
Yeah. I mean, and the funny thing is like, for me, it's purely a stewardship issue.
Right.
I mean, there are two. One is like, if I show up and visit your world, I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm cool. If I had to live there, I would just be so impatient and frustrated and like I have no time for it. But the other thing is this, more importantly, I look in your world and like, oh, there's Rob Bell. Oh, there's Pete Rollins. Oh, there's all these, there's, Rachel Held Evans. Like there's all these wonderful people over there. I look over in the world of people that are trying to establish warm communities for people that can't believe any of that stuff, and that language is triggering to, and man, it is slim pickings out here.
Right.
And so for me, it's purely a matter of like, I have this one life to live. Where can I make the biggest impact? Where can I love the most people in a way that will make a difference in their lives? And it's very clear to me that your world doesn't need me.
Yeah.
But that this world of folks that are unable or unwilling to connect with any kind of narrative that's rooted in Jesus and all that. All those words are just triggering. They've been abused by those words.
Yeah.
I go like, those people need me.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel, and now one of the things I'm committed to, like I just did this, I did a dialogue up in Canada where I was quote unquote debating with Sean McDowell, Josh McDowell's son.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I've known Sean since he was a young kid, or like a college kid, but like, and it was a fascinating thing. It was 1,200 Christians. And like, he's going into like the old apologetic stuff. And
really?
I'm just, and I'm not, like we had a good conversation. But after it was over with, all these Christians came up and said, like, I never met a secular person like you. Like, this gives me hope for my auntie and, like for my son and stuff like that. And I'm like, that's a good win for me, is because every Christian person in the world is connected to people that are fully secular. And those relationships don't always work very smoothly. And so like, I'm trying to model, like with my dad, in that film we made, like Leaving My Father's Face. Have you seen that thing yet?
I haven't seen it. I was going to ask you about that, how it's doing, and when we can do a showing here in Minneapolis and host it and have you here.
You can get it on Amazon Prime right now.
Yeah.
And you should check it out because you would love it, because it models exactly the kind of conversation that we're having here, where it's like, I want to understand where you're coming from, but I don't want to undermine it.
Yeah.
And that's the way he approaches me, and that's the way I approach him. And it's all based on this freedom thing that says like, it doesn't really like,
it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter. Yeah. What matters is like finding an exercise, like, I don't care whether you do CrossFit or yoga or, Pilates. I just want you to be healthy.
Yeah.
And like, if Pilates messes with you because of your joints and yoga works better, that's fine for me. Like, all I care about is your health.
Yeah, and in your current story, it's maybe like, hey, and stay off the damn bike. I've fallen off my bike twice. It's really racked me up.
God, tell me about it. Like,
and I keep climbing on that religion tool, and I'm wiping out, and I keep getting hurt.
that's that article that you sent me.
Yeah.
Is that that these people that are in a narrative and they're open to the other narrative.
Yeah.
A lot of times that really is a better question for them is, which narrative has a future for you?
Uh-huh.
Which narrative will keep you connected to your family? Which narrative is going to work? So like I know people that there's no choice left. But there are some people who they're Christian in a toxic way. And sometimes I say to them, like, hey, you should read this book by Brian McLaren, like, because there's a less toxic way to be a Christian. And if you could hang on to being a Christian, it's going to work way better for your marriage.
Yeah. And I'm sure you know, because you're around the Christian world a lot, many religious people don't know science-based secular humanists that they feel akin to or kinship with.
I'm right here, baby.
Yeah, right. That's right. You got to write that book, right? So someone can hand that book out.
Doug,
books,
I can't tell you
how many the world.
I can't tell you how many people, Christian people, listen to Humanize Me. Like, and they write to me and go like, I still believe in a loving God, but it's all very confusing to me. And the way you talk about walking secularly is really helpful to me. And the way you talk, the people you have on there are really interesting to me. But like, they're like, you're the first secular person that I've met that I feel like has a heart that beats in the same rhythm as mine. And, you say like, well, are some of those people going to eventually come over? And I go like, they probably will, but many of them won't. And they don't need to. They just need to pursue loving relationships and social and justice and make things better for other people and cultivate a sense of gratitude for the wonders of this life. And you go like, well, you could do that either way. And I go like, I know that. And that's the way to make the most of your life. And I got the data to prove it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole, to my mind, again, I'll stop beating this drum, but that's the whole point of I'm like, that's the heart of a Jesus oriented teaching, I think, is it is without demand. Like the idea that someone would say, well, couldn't I live this life without believing all those other things? That's the whole point, right? As my friend Barry Taylor said, yes, of course you can, but people don't. So what do we do to compel one another? So I think what Jesus was compelling was not believe in some mythical future punishment, but go and do likewise. Actually do this thing. The call is not to set up a system by which it's only possible under these conditions. It's possible under all the conditions. So then you start asking yourself the questions about, why don't I? And if you approach a religious teacher from the attitude of, it helps me to live my humanity, that is a much different narrative than, oh, this is the explanation for why I don't live out my full humanity.
And what are the best conditions? Why don't I? And maybe a better question is like, what are the ideal conditions under which I would? And that's why, like, a secular humanist fellowship like mine creates an ideal condition for somebody who, for one person, and is not the ideal condition for somebody else. And you sort of go like, listen, figure out what are the ideal conditions under which you can pursue goodness, which you can experience love and where you can make things better for other people, and like go there. And some of my secular friends are horrified by me, and they're like, but it's not true. Like, and I go like, it doesn't matter. Like you're not gonna like, first of all, like just cause what if I convinced a Christian that it was all bullshit, right? Which, depending on the Christian, wouldn't be that hard to do.
Yeah.
That doesn't guarantee that they're going to find a fellowship like mine. That doesn't guarantee that they're going to embrace finitude and sort of see the upside of death as part of the whole life bargain. And like, it's mixed in there, and you can't have the one without, they might just despair. So like, you disabuse somebody of their faith at your own, like, you be careful. Yeah. So like, again, and if that person despairs, they might become like a social problem. So you go like, wait a second, are you saying from a utilitarian perspective, there are some people that it would probably be better if you left them believing in God, whether or not God is true? And I go like, Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, this pursuit of truth at all costs of the human experience. Religion has been doing that for a long time. Science has been doing that for a long time. Every demand system has been. You call them what?
I call them truthers. These people that come to me and go like, the thing that is the most important to me is truth.
Yeah.
And I just like, and if somebody's out of the truth, I want to correct them. Like something, I'm like, truth is a tool, baby.
Yeah.
Like the only thing that matters is human flourishing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like, if truth gets you there, great. And if your grandmother's lying on her deathbed and she says like, oh, my sister Sally, who's been dead for 40 years, is standing next to the thing. Say hello to her. You know what I do? I say, hi, Aunt Sally. How are you? And you're like, shouldn't you tell your grandmother the truth? Why let her die in an error? And I go like, fuck truth. Right. I'm interested in love.
Yeah.
You know? And so like truth is a tool, and it's almost always a really good tool, but it does not always set you free. Sometimes a good illusion will get you out of a burning house. Sometimes you're in the house looking for your kitten, and your mother calls in and says, "I've got your kitten in my arms out here," and you run out of the burning house. And you're saved. And later on, she says, "Yeah, I knew. Like now, aren't you glad?" She goes, "Like, yeah, I was crazy. I was out of my mind about the kitten. I was unfocused." And you go, "Like, yeah, I had to lie to you to do the best." Yeah. And you go, "Like, oh, so the lie set me free." And you go, "Like, yeah. Sometimes the lie sets you free." Yeah,
you probably saw my head sort of get that curious dog look, when you said that, because I found myself saying like, what. Why does that land funny for me? And I realized, because I tend to say things like, truth is that which sets you free. Yeah. As opposed to the truth, because I think that's really what that phrase is getting at, is the thing that sets you free. There you got it. That's your that's your truth. And that's just a slightly different little, fancy way of saying certain things. But that's the difference, right? Is what the human flourishing is. To just throw another little Jesus quote in there. I think this is what Jesus is getting at when he says something like, Sabbath, that ultimately true religious experience, it was designed to benefit humanity, not humanity to benefit the religious system. So if you've got to break the Sabbath in order to keep it, go ahead, do whatever. Break it to keep it. That's not the point. The point is you don't let people die in a ditch any more than you would your ox because it's the wrong day. You have to be freed from all of that kind of thing. So again, I think it's just that's the project, and anyone who's coming at that project, I think is actually, I think I've said this to you before, one way to organize the world is by horizontal or vertical columns. Another way is to organize by horizontal categories. And some of us are in different religious columns, but we'd find ourselves in the same horizontal category. So I find myself in the human flourishing cross horizontal category, and that connects me much differently than with the people from the religious or non-religious vertical categories. So it's these conversations we're having are across this human flourishing narrative. That's
so good. That is such a good image, that cross hatching.
Really?
Like, oh, that's so good. Because I was just with a bunch of secular humanists who were after a conference who gathered together and said, like, this movement is off the rails because it's pursuing all these other things and it's not pursuing human flourishing. And we want to do a love oriented. We want to create some events and do some things. And like they're the human flourishing branch of this kind of, and you can get these atheist folks who are like, who just want, they just want to fight, or they just want to disabuse people of religion. They just want to be right, and to make everybody else wrong. And you go like, oh, and then then there's this tranche, the human flourishing bunch, and you go like, yeah, that's the horizontal, and that's the game we're in. And so like that is a beautiful image to me. Like, stop worrying so much about what vertical tranche somebody's in, and start looking really carefully at what horizontal tranche they're in.
Yeah.
All right, listen, I gotta go.
Yeah. Hey, let's do an event together with all the human flourishing people. Let's kick that one around.
Yeah, that'd be great. And listen, I really do. Like, this is not for your audience, but like, I really want you to see the movie because I know you love my dad.
Yeah. Oh, I'm totally planning to see it. In fact, we were going to have a watching party together, and I said, let's see if Bart will come in town. We could do a citywide watching party and then an interview.
Totally would. Oh yeah,
really?
Totally.
This summer?
Yeah, oh my God. Yeah, absolutely. Just invite me.
Okay, great. Let's do that. Let's do that this summer.
Yeah.
We'll have you in town.
All
okay.
right.
All right.
Love
see
you,
you, buddy.
Love you.
Love you.
Talk to
Bye.
you later. Bye-bye. How do I get rid of you now?
I will get rid of you with a master end meeting for all button. And you're gone. Hey, that was it. My conversation with Bart. Fun. I hope you liked it anyway. I certainly did. Hey, thanks for being a supporter by your listening of Now We're Talking with Doug Pagitt. You can financially support it if you want over at Patreon. You can go to dougpagitt.com and spell that with one G and two T's. Unlike I've spelled Bart Campolo with two L's on the video screen. So he was Bart Campolo today. All right, friends. We'll talk to you next time around.